So I'm Steve Abaddon. I'm the motivator behind biologyispoetry.com. I want to talk about some biology. Today I want to talk about how it is that one can survive and even do well in a majors biology class. So when I taught majors biology, about 40% of the class that started would receive a grade that basically was less than a C minus. And that I didn't, of course, consider to be very good. And the students, of course, didn't consider that to be very good. The students were always rather shocked when they didn't do as well in biology class as they had hoped for, or had hoped to. I, at the time, and still believe that the reason that this is that when they walk into biology in college, they really don't have a good sense of what biology is all about. I used to start my lectures by saying, or actually by drawing from memory, all of what is known as glycolysis, with all the structures and all the names of all the components of it, all the intermediates, and also all the names of the enzymes. And I would just do this silently, and then I would stop and I would say, does anybody know what this is? And a few would know. And then I would point to it and I would say, you guys have absolutely no idea what biology is all about. And unfortunately it's true. And the reason for this is that biology in high school tends to, of course, not have much chemistry, because people don't know much chemistry when they're in high school. And biology in high school doesn't have much math, so that throws out a lot of what genetics is all about. And biology in high school really, truly, highly unfortunately, tends not to consider evolution. And if you take away math and evolution and chemistry, and perhaps especially evolution and chemistry, you really don't have all that much left. And so when people are learning biology in high school, they think they're learning biology, but in reality, you know, they're not learning much of biology. And when they're faced with what biology really is, when they're trying to learn, integrate, even at a fairly low level, the chemistry that makes up the base, I like to think of it as, of what biology is all about. And for that matter, evolutionary biology, which is not trivial. And really, ecology is tough too when you start getting into the nitty-gritty of stuff, and learning all those names, which you probably did in high school as well, is tough as well. So the trouble is that people come in and they really aren't all that certain what it is that they're about to learn, and they're also really not all that well prepared for how hard it is to learn all this stuff. When you go into physics, you know, oh yeah, physics is going to be tough, so at least you know physics is going to be tough. When you walk into chemistry, usually, people think, oh, this is going to be tough, and yes, it is tough. But when you walk into biology, perhaps because there's not as much math, people think, oh, this isn't going to be that hard. And then, of course, they're faced with the reality of the situation where it is that hard. And they have trouble dealing with it. And by trouble dealing with it, I don't mean trouble dealing with it on a psychological level. I mean trouble dealing with it by simply doing what it takes to do well. And so I prepared a page that goes through the various hints that I want to give people, 10 of them. I like to come up with lists that are 10 items long, of how to do well in biology, in majors biology class. And as I've been on my little hike today, I have put together some headings to the 10 lists, and what I want to do is go through these headings and talk about them a little bit. So here we go. This is all on my cell phone. If it looks like I'm looking down at something, it's because I am. Okay, so the first item is, studying is hard. So if you're studying and you're not working hard, if it's not hard work to study, then you're probably not studying very hard. You can't just simply read and think that that's studying. It's not studying. Studying is sitting down and actually learning things. I remember in college that I used to lie in bed Saturday mornings, and the mornings used to last sometimes even 6 and 8 hours, especially when I was getting ready for an exam. And I would just sit there and I would go over and over and over the material in my head until I had it in my head perfectly. Before I was willing to start my day. Now admittedly this gets in the way of one's social life, but nonetheless this is what one needs to do, is studying very hard, making the really hard effort, putting in the time that's necessary, and then putting in that time well to actually learn the material. The second thing actually goes along with what I just said, and that is you need to study effectively. So it's not just putting in time, it's actually being effective in the use of your time. So if you are not getting the material into your brain effectively in the course of actually studying for, especially an exam, then you're not really using your time well, even if you're putting in lots of time. You should come up with techniques that work for you, that allow you to get the material into your brain. The third item, in fact, is time. So I want to argue that 20 hours per week put into your majors biology class is actually not a hugely excessive amount of time. So if you start out with spending 3 or 4 hours a week, probably it's 3 hours a week in lecture and maybe 3 hours a week in lab, that's 6 hours already. If you spend another hour each day organizing your material, if you did that 5 days a week, say, then you're already up to 10 hours a week. And then if you spend a large amount of time studying for exams or studying for quizzes, maybe even 10 or 20 hours studying for individual exams, or maybe a couple of hours studying for quizzes, this can all add up on average to roughly 20 hours per week. Now, you're not putting 20 hours per week into every single class. Ideally, some classes you have to emphasize one week, other classes you emphasize other weeks, but over time you're putting in roughly 20 hours a week into studying biology. It might be less than that. If you're really struggling, it might be more than that. But don't think that you're going to be spending 10 hours a week total studying majors biology, because unless you're very, 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 very good, it's going to take you a lot more time than that. The fourth item, learn before you study for an exam, not while you're studying for an exam. While you're studying for the exam, that's when you're kind of finishing things off. You're setting it up so that you know the material really well when you walk into the exam. You're not setting it up so that, maybe now I should learn some of this material. If you're putting things off to that point in time while you're studying for the exam, actually trying to learn the material, it's no wonder if you're doing poorly while you're doing poorly. You've got to be learning the material as you go. When you're actually studying for the exam, that's the time when you're getting the material into your brain to the point where it is really, really in there, all of it, so that when you see the question on the exam, you recognize it and you can answer it well. It's not the time to actually be learning the material. I remember studying for exams and not having a clue about certain things. Quantum mechanics being, of course, the key thing there on everybody's top list of not understanding before they walk into the exam. Of course, that's not biology. If you're at that point and you don't have a clue, you're not going to have a clue when you actually are taking the exam. So you got to learn this material before you're studying for the exam. The fifth thing, organizing material. It's really, really important to organize material. You don't want some big giant mess and say, got to learn that mess. You want something that's really clean and pretty, aesthetically pleasing, something that you want to interact with before you start studying for your exam. Now, organizing the material is not studying for the exam. Yes, organizing the material can help you learn. The actual process of organizing, writing things down, can be helpful towards your learning. I mean, not just subsequent learning, but learning while you're actually organizing the material. But it's not actually studying for the exam. Your goal is to have things organized before you study for the exam. And that's one of the things you're doing while you're spending time outside of the class on weeks when you're not actually preparing or studying directly for the exam. You should know the material really well walking into those exams. You should have a really good idea of how well you know the material and how well you're going to do on the exam before you walk into the exam. Now, I understand that there are professors out there where you walk into the exam and you truly don't have any idea how well you're going to do because you just have no clue. And I apologize on behalf of those professors. But assuming that the exam really is a test of what you have learned for that exam, and there aren't trick questions and all sorts of stuff like that. And remember, trick questions are not always trick questions. Trick questions are often just, does the person know this? And the person doesn't know it. And they're like, that must be a trick question because I didn't have a clue as to what it was asking. In those cases, it's because, you didn't have a clue about what you should have learned for the exam. But besides all of that, you should have a really good idea of how well you know the material walking into the exam. You should have all of those definitions memorized as perfectly as you can. You should understand all of those concepts. You should know what all the figures are, and you should be able to reproduce them on paper, by hand, from memory. You should know all these things, and you should know where your deficits are. I mean, part of the problem, or deficiencies I should say, part of the problem in life is knowing how well you know something. And when you're going through an exam, you really should have a very good idea of what you know and what you don't know. If you're really clueless about the extent to which you have an understanding of the material, particularly after the first exam where you figured out how much you need to know of the material, if you don't know how much of the material you need to be knowing when you walk into that exam and how well you know that material, then you really are not prepared for the exam. You need to triage. So yes, you need to prepare for the exam. You also need to know what you're never going to learn and you just need to give up on. And you have to figure out what it is you already know so well that you really don't need to study hard. That's what triaging is all about. You need to concentrate on that material which you have some potential to learn, but you don't know yet. And when you're doing that, then you have some potential to reduce the amount of stress going into the exam. You might be relieving time pressure. You might also be doing a fair job of setting things up so that you don't don't stress over the material that in fact you're never going to learn. I'm pausing at this point because I'm asking myself the question, is this camera really on? So triaging is about not only using your time well, but also relieving your stress while you're studying. Number 8, figuring out what likely will be on exams is an important life skill. So anytime you're going into any kind of situation, you really need to have some sense of what it is you need to know. And exams are a life situation, and they're a perfect example of a situation in which you're walking into something and you really need to have a good sense of what it is you need to know going in. These are important life skills. If you're going into an important meeting, you really need to know, going into that meeting, what it is you need to know in that meeting. I mean, you just need to. If you're meeting with somebody, heck, if you're preparing a wedding, I mean, you need to know what you need to know, and it's important to have a grasp of what sorts of things you need to know. Part of life is developing the skill of identifying those things that you need to be on top of, and then of course, getting on top of those things. So, I guess I'm repeating myself a little bit here. This is, I guess, a repeat of know the material well, but you should already know how well you know and understand the material before you sit down for an exam. Again, when you walk in there, you really should have a sense of your mastery of this material. If you know 80% of it, you should, have a sense that you know 80% of it, and maybe you only get 80% of the stuff right on the exam. Who knows? But you really should have some sense of how well your understanding and knowledge of the material matches the extent of material that in fact you're going to be held responsible for. And then number 10 is that prepare for exams as though you are preparing for any important life event. Again, I bring up the example of a wedding. If you're preparing for a wedding, you practice and you practice and you practice and you do what needs to be done in order to make sure that the event is pulled off well. In my life, it's usually more, am I preparing for some sort of athletic event? So I'm going skiing for the day. You make sure that you've got all of your equipment all lined up and the car is gassed up and everything is just fine. Your body is functional, something that's important when you're 55 years old to think about. And then you can do a good job when you're going skiing or when you have the wedding or when you're going on the trip or whatever. Preparation is really important. And there really isn't all that big a difference between preparing for any important life events and preparing for an exam. An exam is an important life event. You should be able to figure out what it is that you need to do to prepare for that exam, to be on top of things for that exam, to do well on that exam. And then you need to find the time to do the things that need to be done. And at the same time, you need to be taking care of yourself, being taking care of your body, being taking care of your brain, or taking care of your brain, I should say, instead of putting being in front of there, in order to do well. You are preparing for an event. If it's an athletic event, you would not stay up all night partying before the event. You would not sleep before the event, unless, of course, you have trouble getting to sleep before it. you'd be doing everything you can to prepare your body and your mind so that you can kick butt when you do this important event. And that should be no different from when you're preparing for an exam for biology class. If you do all of those things, you should be setting yourself up so that you at least do better in biology than you might otherwise. And ideally, you can figure out how to make things work so that your way of doing things meshes with your actual learning of biology, so that when you get into your majors biology class in college, you can kick some serious butt and get that A that you want. And that A that no doubt you deserve, but you got to put in the hard work to get there. Thanks. So now I'm going to head off and see if I can get to my buddies and weightlift this morning with still enough time to do so. See you later.